From moral diplomacy to strategic realism. This week, Israel finds itself at a pivotal moment. Trump's visit was a signal that the old rules of diplomacy are being rewritten. At the Sharm el-Sheikh conference, we saw a convergence of interests. The tone was pragmatic, but the language was strategic. And the message is that Israel is no longer playing defense. Israel is asserting itself. And today, I want to give you a fresh take on where Israel and global diplomacy is heading. Hi, I'm Daniel Seaman, and you're watching Straight Up on JNS TV Studios here in Jerusalem, Israel. Israel this week marked the second anniversary of the October 7th massacre, mourning the over 2,000 casualties of that day and the soldiers who fell over the past 2 years. This as the war came to an official end and all the remaining hostages were celebrated upon their release and return home. It was, without a doubt, an historic week, with U.S. President Trump visiting Israel and attending the conference of all the nations he has been directing into participating in the plan that he has for the Middle East. We watched, astounded, as the leaders all lined up to get their photo taken with him in Sharm el-Sheikh. Much has been quietly unfolding beneath the surface of the headlines, things that will redefine the Middle East as we know it. And it's not just about Gaza. It's not just about hostages or ceasefires. It's about a vision, a strategic framework that's been in the making for nearly 7 years between Netanyahu and Trump, through the hands of Dermer and Kushner. And now, with phase 1 of the Gaza agreement complete, that vision is ready to launch. The Trump-Netanyahu regional framework is, as one Israeli commentator, Shlomo Feilber, describes, it as follows: a geostrategic vision connecting countries, continents, and interests. It offers a comprehensive solution to regional challenges, strengthening Israel and weakening Iran. Trump sees it as a move towards global peace. This is the day after so many have been asking about since the war erupted 2 years ago, not just in regards to Gaza, but for the entire Middle East. What the framework offers is a new vision for the Middle East, an economic, diplomatic, and security-oriented vision that unites the interests of Arab countries, Israel, and the United States. This is a broad-scale initiative aimed at reshaping the region, pushing back Iran and Palestinian influence, and positioning Israel as a central axis between continents. The European leaders, who just 2 months ago promised the recognition of a Palestinian state, are now lining up behind Trump and the agreement he brought, which stipulates, among other things, that this issue will only be discussed years from now, after the Palestinian Authority undergoes dramatic reforms and changes. Until then, they're not even to be participants in the Gaza administration agreement. Each country has its own interests in joining this peace plan. This isn't a peace plan in the traditional sense. It's a geostrategic blueprint that blends economics, diplomacy, and security to unite Arab states, Israel, and the United States around shared interests through infrastructure, trade, and pragmatic cooperation. For Gaza, the plan includes 20 points. Among these is the return of the Israeli hostages that happened this week, demilitarization, the dismantling of Hamas, and even voluntary migration, and the launch of economic development projects for Gaza. There is more, though. The population that remains is meant to undergo a cultural shift, a Western-style education, and integration into a new regional model. Parallel with the reconstruction of Gaza, and following reforms within the Palestinian Authority itself, conditions may emerge for the first time for a credible path towards realizing their dream and aspirations for self-determination and maybe even statehood. The United States will initiate dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians to agree on a political horizon for peaceful and prosperous coexistence. Shlomo Feilber estimates in his commentary that under these expectations, we will not see a Palestinian state in our lifetime, because the Palestinian issue was never about statehood or peaceful coexistence. As for other participants, Egypt plays a pivotal role. The Sinai Peninsula becomes an economic lifeline. A relocation camp in Rafah could house up to 1 million Palestinians. Egypt also benefits from Gaza's reconstruction, a restored Suez Canal revenues, and American financial aid. Then there's Jordan, and Jordan is joining not out of ideology, but out of necessity. It seeks regime stability, through its alliance with the United States. In this agreement, it gains from the land bridge, water and gas from Israel. Then there's the India-Europe land bridge that goes through Israel, and it's already under construction. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are already plugged in as well. The East Med pipeline, carrying energy and the internet from Israel to Europe, now includes Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. They want to reduce dependence on the Strait of Hormuz and tap into the massive revenues that have come out of this bridge to Europe. Qatar and Kuwait are in this too. Wealthy family elites close to the royal family are expected to build the pipeline, securing their participation. They see Israel as a stable, reliable partner and want in on the regional tech and energy booms that are expected. Even Indonesia and Malaysia are in play. Indonesia, it wants OECD membership, which requires that it have ties with Israel. It's expected to join the Gaza reconstruction bond offerings and benefit from Israeli high-tech. Malaysia, influenced by Indonesia, may follow suit. This creates a clear interest even for distant Muslim nations. And then there's the opposition, the Palestinian Authority and Iran. These are the only two entities that are resisting this framework. The Trump era marks the end of the Palestinian dream for statehood. Arab support for the Gaza agreement erodes the historical foundation of Palestinian claims. The paradigm is shifting, and very fast. This is more than just a regional plan. It will have global ramifications, hence the Western allies' participation. Europe itself stands to gain a lot from this. It will now have the East Med and the IMEC infrastructure, and this will reduce its dependence on the Russian gas. Greece, Cyprus, Italy, Germany, France all have something to gain, as do Eastern European countries such as Bulgaria, Romania, and even Hungary. Asia is also deeply involved. India gains fast access to the European markets. Turkey and Azerbaijan benefit from new transport links. Singapore, Vietnam, they see indirect gains through the improved trade routes. And Africa, it also isn't left out. Morocco, it gains from the infrastructure investment. Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, they all benefit from expanded Gulf trade routes and energy investments. This is diplomacy built on infrastructure and economic benefits, not on ideology. Trump, as I said, sees this framework as a path to global peace. This is not the peace of Oslo. It's not the chaos of the Arab Spring. It's a new model, one that doesn't excuse dysfunction, that doesn't lower expectations, that doesn't pretend that values can exist without accountability. So here's the question. Is this the day after Gaza or the dawn of a new Middle East? A Middle East where Israel is no longer isolated, but it is a major factor, where Arab states prioritize growth over grievance, where diplomacy, as AI describes it, is measured in megawatts, trade routes, and strategic leverage. This is the vision, and it's unfolding right before us. For anyone who had doubts on whether Hamas is finished, well, Trump's statements this week was very clear. He said Hamas will be dismantled and won't be a governing force. So yes, there are reasons not to dismiss or deny that Israel is advancing towards its war's objectives in a very meaningful way. And it's taking a bold step forward, despite all the expectations that this would be a drawn-out process. One thing Israelis don't quite grasp is that countries in this region and in the world ultimately think about their own particular interests. I know that even in Africa, in Asia, and among leaders in the Arab world, there are countries that want one thing: to strengthen themselves against many threats that they face. And Israel isn't even an issue for them, and certainly not one that poses a threat to their interests. Quite the opposite. Just to give you an idea of how things are far more complex than we assume. The Washington Post reported on what it described as leaked, classified documents from the U.S. Department of Defense. That 6 Arab countries expanded their security and military cooperation with Israel during the recent war on Gaza, despite publicly condemning Israeli operations in the enclave. It pointed to joint Israel-U.S. coordination with 6 Arab states, with Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates and Jordan, in countering what they described as the Iranian threat. Based on the leak files, the American Central Command, CENTCOM, reportedly held several meetings and joint exercises with senior military officials from Israel and the 6 Arab countries over the past 3 years. These sessions, the newspaper said, focused on regional threats, such as Iran and underground tunnel warfare. The documents indicate that this cooperation quietly deepened, even as major Arab countries, particularly Qatar, publicly denounced Israel's military actions in Gaza as genocide. The meetings, according to the Post, took place under direct supervision from the U.S. military leadership. The leaked files obtained by the newspaper reveal that these gatherings occurred in Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, with high-ranking officers from Saudi Arabia and the UAE in attendance. The documents also described Kuwait and Oman as potential partners who were briefed on the meeting's content. And on this topic, Professor Uzi Rabi, head of the Program of Regional Cooperation at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University, said in an interview to Galei Israel Radio this week that peace is a word we need to remove from the lexicon for the upcoming years. Why? Because peace requires someone to examine their conscience and then change. And that's not what is happening. What Trump brings is diplomacy built on interests, not on vague ideals. So let's be realistic. Turkey is not going to become Switzerland suddenly, and Qatar isn't turning into a liberal democracy. What drives every country is its own interests, first and foremost. And as Professor Rabi says, if we understand that and play the game with Trump's foreign policy and diplomacy, we'll succeed. Sitting down and talking with Hamas and making peace, as a former U.S. Senator and Secretary of State suggested this week, that's yesterday's thinking. We're talking about tomorrow, and tomorrow is built from raw interests. Israel post-October 7th is a new Israel. It has tools and it has strength. My personal love of history and my college degree have given me a few benefits. I remember how I loved history processes and how they affect the long term. So when analyzing where Trump is going and how it is changing diplomacy, I look back at similar points in history. Over a century ago, U.S. President William Howard Taft believed in what was called dollar diplomacy, using economic leverage to achieve strategic goals. It was transactional, grounded in national interest. Then we had President Woodrow Wilson and his moral diplomacy, the idea that the United States should support nations that shared its values, democracy, peace, human rights. It was noble, idealistic, and in many ways necessary after the horrors of World War I. But here's the problem. The West took Wilson's vision and ran too far with it. Over the past generation, they started demanding what was righteous. Western diplomacy has failed by applying Wilsonian ideals without regard for local realities. I don't just mean oversight. I mean through the subtle racism of low expectations. Western leaders haven't just ignored the cultural and political complexities of non-Western societies. They excused them. They've assumed that certain nations, because of history, religion, geography, simply can't be held to the same standards that we hold ourselves. And that's dangerous. Take the Oslo Accords, for example. The West pushed for peace, but never demanded that the Palestinian leadership uphold the same democratic norms or human rights standards that they expected of Israel. When violations occurred, incitement, corruption, authoritarianism, violence, and terrorism, they brushed it aside. Or look at the Arab Spring. Western governments cheered the uprisings, assuming that democracy would follow naturally. Instead, what we got was chaos. Why? Because we ignored the local interests, the cultural realities, the strategic calculus. Trump's approach is diplomacy built on deals, not dreams, not waiting for moral approval, but building strategic alliances. This isn't about abandoning values, but prioritizing interests. So here's my thesis. Moral diplomacy had its time, but today we need a new language, one that blends realism with restraint, one that respects values but doesn't weaponize them. Israel is showing us what this looks like. The Sharm Conference was a blueprint, because in this region and at this moment, that's the only language that gets results. And that's the new language of diplomacy. Not peace, not virtue, not moral clarity, but interests, leverage, and survival. Thank you very much for being with us.